The Carolina Panthers are getting better under Andy Dalton, and the Chicago Bears seem to be turning a corner with Caleb Williams, but they'll get a great sign of their own progress in this Week 5 matchup as we break it down on this Crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Panthers podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bears and Locked On Panthers. I'm your host, Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears, alongside Julian Council from Locked On Panthers, getting ready for this Bears-Panthers Week 5 matchup. A revenge game for Andy Dalton, some more progress from Caleb Williams, some key matchups and some key storylines for us to get throughout the course of the show today. I do want to let you know that our Crossover Thursday podcast is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Julian, I think the Panthers were a team that everyone had written off even before Week 1, and then after a couple games with Bryce Young, definitely wrote off and said, this team's going to be no good all year. Give them the number 1 overall pick. Let's move on. Andy Dalton comes in a couple weeks ago, and I know it hasn't been all wins since then, but it feels like there's a lot more hope around this team. What are some of the biggest storylines now coming into this matchup that we've seen a couple of games of the Dalton experience?
Yeah, well, in the words of Geno Smith, they wrote me off, but I didn't write back. And the Panthers still sit at 1-3 after a competitive loss against the Bengals. And that's really all fans have been asking for after what they witnessed Week 1 and Week 2 of Bryce Young operating the offense at quarterback, was just for this team to be competent. And they have been that the last 2 weeks of Andy Dalton as their starting quarterback. And looking on the offensive side of the ball, obviously Andy Dalton has been a big story as he's been able to come in and stabilize things, have the offense just be functional. Chuba Hubbard has been excellent the last 2 weeks running the football, 100 yards rushing in back-to-back weeks, the first time in his career that he has done that. Deontay Johnson has been dynamic the last 2 weeks. And really that's been kind of the storyline here since Monday when Adam Schefter decided to just throw a Molotov cocktail into everybody's living room here in the Carolinas when he said that Deontay Johnson will not be back in Carolina next year and that he could be a trade candidate once the deadline comes at the beginning of next month, him and Adam Thielen, who currently is on IR. And that took a lot of people aback as Panther fans like, whoa. We were having a good time. Like we're vibing. Like the team is on a constant embarrassment the last 2 weeks. And now you're saying that the best receiver on the team, the best playmaker is not going to be back next year. And that's the thing too, that I don't think a lot of people understand. Yes, Adam Schefter is a reporter. He is one of the league leading insiders, but every time he goes on a show, it's not him reporting something. It could also just be his honest opinion and assessment of the situation. You look at the situation here in Carolina, Deontay Johnson is on an expiring deal. Deontay Johnson got traded here to Carolina. He did not choose to be a Carolina Panther, and the Panthers don't know who their quarterback's going to be next year. So you just put 2 and 2 together. Yeah, it's possible. He might not be in Carolina next season, but Dave Canales was asked about this by Dave Newton of ESPN.com on Wednesday during his press conference, and he said, my job is to do the best thing to put the best 11 guys out there to win. That's my job as the head coach. The guys we have, we love the guys and the development and the progression that we have, so I don't see that happening. So he came out and said he does not see it happening. Could it happen? Well, it all depends on what they do on Sunday against the Bears and what they do in the ensuing weeks leading up to that trade deadline and whether it makes sense for the Panthers to try to get some compensation for a player who Adam Schefter says will not be here next season.
Obviously, quarterback play has been better since they put Andy Dalton in the game, but also, like you mentioned, the running game has been better. Receivers been making plays. Like, how much of that is that just like the opponents they were playing against, maybe the defenses got worse versus like having better quarterback play made the rest of the offense better, or did the rest of the offense getting better help Andy Dalton's job be easier? Like, what's the relationship there on offense?
I think it's 100% inserting a different quarterback. Week 1, the Saints came out and just blew the doors off the Panthers. The Panthers defense, we'll talk about them momentarily. Like, they have issues, but offensively, guys were open. The offensive line protected. I looked at Pro Football Focus and their pass blocking stat. The Panthers are second in the NFL, and they have been among one of the worst offensive lines the last couple of years and have not been able to protect. Like last season, they had 7 different left guards, 8 different right guards. I'm sorry, Panther fans. I know I say it all the time, but we cannot forget the trauma that we went through last season. And you're not going to have success if you have that many changing parts on your offensive line. Go back to 2021 when Sam Darnold was a starting quarterback here in Carolina. 13 out of 17 games had a different starting offensive line combination. When you don't have continuity and consistency there, you're not going to have success, even if the talent level is high or low in that position group. So I really think inserting Dalton has been what's changed things around. The Panthers have been able to actually convert on third down. They were 1 of 22 in the first 2 weeks. They have been around 50% the last two with Dalton at quarterback, and that's allowed them to actually run the football, something that Dave Canales said he wanted to do all offseason long. And Chuba Hubbard, coincidentally, not really, has had 200-yard rushing games the last 2 weeks because they've been able to actually move the football and stay out on the field. I hate it for Bryce Young. I still have belief that he could have success in the right situation in the NFL. I don't think the Panthers set him up for success last year. They certainly did this year to begin the first 2 games of the season. It just did not work out. And it's really Andy that's been things that's changed things around more so than everybody else around him has elevated.
Well, Bears fans know the feeling when you go from between young quarterback to Andy Dalton and back and forth, and that is not necessarily where you feel like you want to be as a franchise there. But I want to quickly go over to this Panthers defense where Shaq Thompson goes on injured reserve and Josie Jewell is injured and not on IR yet as far as I'm concerned, but as far as I know, but not expected to have either of those linebackers this week for the Panthers defense against Chicago. Where do you see that being the biggest impact in the run defense or in coverage? I know they blitz them quite a bit. Where do you sort of see that having the most impact?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Josie Jewell actually has been kind of a liability in coverage. Looking at PFF, they credit him with a 158.3 passer rating when targeted. And for the folks that don't know, that's a perfect passer rating in the NFL. So he was not good against the Bengals. And I understand Joe Burrow is excellent. I'm not expecting that Caleb Williams is going to pose that kind of a threat, at least early on in his career, as this can be his 5th career start. Yeah, it's tough to see those guys go down. Obviously, Shaq Thompson's the guy they missed all of last season, aside from the first 2 games of the year with a broken ankle and leg. Now the Achilles tear. He's a free agent after this year, so maybe the last time we're going to see him as a Carolina Panther. And yeah, Jewell is dealing with a hamstring / groin. It's both a hamstring and a groin. He's not expected to go on IR. He's going to miss Sunday. So that means Trevin Wallace, the rookie that they drafted at Kentucky in the 3rd round, he's going to step up. He's going to wear the green dot. And he's going to be their leader at inside linebacker alongside Claude and Cherilus. Both those guys will be making their first career starts at linebacker in the NFL and for the Panthers. And I think communication is one thing that you want to see. And Dave Canales has said that when on Sunday, Trevin Wallace came in, even when Josie Jewell was still in the game, he was wearing the green dot and was getting those guys in position. He has really been the most impressive of the rookies leading up to the season as Xavier Legette. He has had some issues, at least back in training camp and OTAs, of being healthy, where Trevin Wallace is out there, and they put him in some sets where he was the lone linebacker out on the field as they were trying to prepare him to be the guy eventually they thought it was going to be next year. So that's what you're kind of looking at is being able to get the guys lined up properly and also just run fit. Panthers been terrible against the run, and Shaq Thompson is one of their best run defenders. Jewell has had an up and down start to the season, and Wallace got washed away late in that game against Cincinnati when they try to salt things away. So him and Cherilus are going to have to step up, fill those gaps, and really be physical and lead that defense in the middle if the Panthers are going to have success on Sunday against the Bears.
Yeah, and the Bears are certainly going to be looking to attack that middle in the ground game and through the air as well. Chicago also dealing with some injuries of their own on the offensive and defensive line. So we'll take a quick step away here, and when we come back, we will talk about the Bears side of this matchup and some of the big storylines coming in around Caleb Williams and this Bears offense trying to get going, and the defense still playing pretty sharp. That's next on our crossover Thursday, Locked On Bears, Locked On Panthers. This episode of Locked On Bears and Locked On Panthers is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Gametime is the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events, whether it's this Bears-Panthers game on Sunday or other sporting events, concerts, theater shows, comedy shows, you name it. They've got it all on Gametime. I actually just used the Gametime app the other day and went and saw Soulja Boy in concert. It was a great show. Didn't know how often I'm going to be able to get to see Soulja Boy in my area, but hey, you know what? It was fun, and it was nice with Gametime. I could see my view from my seat before I bought my tickets, so I knew exactly what I was going to be purchasing. And Gametime has all-in pricing that you can turn on so that you don't have any of the added fees at the end of the checkout process either. You know exactly how much you're paying when you're picking your tickets. It's so much easier, and it's why they say you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. As we continue our crossover podcast, Locked On Bears, Locked On Panthers, Lauren Cox here alongside Julian Council. We turn our attention to the Chicago Bears that got a much-needed win over the Los Angeles Rams last week. They had lost 2 in a row coming into that game, and there wasn't a lot of confidence in this Bears offense as a whole being able to operate smoothly and really put a competent group around Caleb Williams. The defense has been fine all season. The struggle's been trying to get a running game going, have receivers make plays after the catch, but it felt like not for 4 full quarters, but for enough of the game against the Rams, they got things rolling here. And now there's definitely been a sigh of relief in Chicago. Like, okay, we figured some things out. And now you've got a struggling Carolina Panthers defense with some injuries at linebacker. And I think Bears fans are licking their chops a little bit at getting this one and trying to get a second straight win.
Yeah, I would think so. And I watched a lot of the game against the Colts the week prior, and I was wondering, do you feel like that's kind of when things maybe turn around even before last week where they did have some ability to run the ball? Because I know Indianapolis has not been great against the run, and Caleb Williams threw for over 300 yards in that game. Saw Roma Dunze get started. Felt like that might be, because I know early on, like that first game was kind of rough there for a little bit earlier this season, but it feels like that may have been a turning point too, just from an outsider's perspective when looking at the Bears. What did you think about that?
Yeah, in the fourth quarter of that game, they had a couple of nice drives where the offense was in rhythm and in sync and working the way down the field. And it was kind of a question of like, okay, was this actually them finding something, or was this the Colts with a 2-possession lead, maybe taking the foot off the gas a little bit here and not letting the Bears back in, but you know what I mean? Not necessarily attacking them in the same ways they did earlier in that game. But it carried over, at least eventually, into the Rams game. They started slow. They pretty much started slow every game this season. This has been a second half team for sure on offense. And against the Rams, like back-to-back touchdown scoring drives for the first time all season was not something we were used to seeing. And finally against the Rams, they get the running game going. Like the Colts were the worst run defense in football, and they couldn't run against them, but they found it against Los Angeles. So again, we're kind of wondering, like, is this sustainable, or was it a Rams team that was even more injured than this Panthers team, especially on defense there, where you just kind of wonder quality of opponent versus real progress, but you don't necessarily feel like the Panthers are some huge step forward in quality of opponent. So in theory, you should be able to do it again.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting because Carolina has not been great against the run. Last time I checked, they were 20th in EPA against the run and on defense, and they were 13th last week. And I found it to be interesting because the Panthers, they gave a ton of yards week 1 against the Saints, a ton of yards week 2 against Chargers, and people were saying, well, that's because the offense didn't move the ball. It's like, okay, sure, but the Saints want to run the ball. We know Jim Harbaugh wants to run the ball as well. And then the Raiders, the worst run team in the league until, I guess, on Sunday, they finally figured it out against whoever they played. Forget, they couldn't run the ball. So if the Panthers are able to stop the Raiders, feels like they should be able to stop the Bears. But looking just at the offense overall, like what's the biggest storyline for that offense for the Bears heading into the game? I'm wondering, because last year I had to listen to a lot of people say the Panthers should have drafted CJ Stroud. I'm curious, is there any talk in Chicago after watching what Jaden Daniels is doing so far, if maybe the Bears may have gotten this one wrong, even though there's still plenty of time, and I think it's a little bit too early to say that, but I mean, look.
Yeah, I mean, Jaden Daniels has had a really great start to the season, and you know, you don't want to take anything away from that. I think there have been a lot of national conversations about Daniels being, you know, should the Bears have picked Daniels, but you're not getting much of that in Chicago. I don't think you're getting a lot of Bears fans actually worried that they took the wrong quarterback here. And I think there've been some really good comparisons to the first few games from Andrew Luck and RG3. Not that Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels are exactly the same as Andrew Luck and RG3 respectively, but that RG3 came out really hot in those early games because Washington was scheming up an offense for him to kind of focus in on specific traits that worked well for him and maybe simplify things in a lot of ways so that he could come out of the gate quickly. Whereas the Colts were really kind of opening the whole book up for Andrew Luck and saying, hey, full field reads, full progressions, you're manning everything at the line of scrimmage. We're asking you to do everything like a big boy quarterback. And you're a little bit slower out of the gate because it's just so much on his plate. And then over time, you know, you see that as Luck had that broader foundation, he kind of settled in a little bit more, whereas RG3 had more trouble like adapting down the line to doing more as a quarterback. And I think there's some similar storylines there with Caleb and Jaden Daniels. Not one-to-one, but I think Cliff Kingsbury is doing a great job of scheming up an offense for Jaden Daniels where it's a little bit simpler. He's not reading the full field as much, a little more one read, a lot of RPOs in that offense, whereas Caleb is doing everything. And maybe it was a little too much for him early on here, but like this last game against the Rams felt like this, like a kind of a breakthrough for him in the sense of like, hanging in the pocket, taking the checkdowns when they're there, not trying to do too much, just operate the offense and game manage a little bit more, because for the first time he could rely on a running game and he could rely on playmakers making more plays after the catch than we had saw through the first 3 games of the year. And then a defense on the other side that keeps them well within range on the scoreboard every time. So you don't have to drop everything and just throw 60 times. A little more like they got away from against the Colts, where he threw over 50 passes in that game because they just couldn't run the ball.
Yeah, I found it so interesting, those situations, because I look back last year at Bryce Young. There was really never a doubt that he was going to be the starter week 1 in Chicago. Kind of feels like that was the same plan where from day one, Caleb was always going to be their guy. There was never any thought of he's going to have to compete or he might have to sit out for a little bit, where Washington, there was some doubt of whether they were going to start Jaden Daniels immediately. Same thing you look at Denver, where, I mean, Bo Nix has not played well. They have won the last 2 weeks in spite of him, I think, of that game against the Jets on Sunday. But they were trying to see whether they were going to start him right away. And I do wonder, when teams decide, like with Caleb or like with Bryce last year, and I think the Bears have Caleb in a much better situation than Carolina had Bryce Young in last year, when they decide, like, right off the bat that you're going to be our guy, do they sometimes skate away from some of the things they should do that could actually help the rookie instead of putting so much on their plate right away? So hopefully, for Caleb's sake, and just for someone who really enjoyed watching him back at OU and at USC, that he can start figuring things out, as it sounds like he is. Defensively, though, like, the Bears seem to be pretty good. What's going on with that Bears defense as they're trying to help that rookie out after the first 4 weeks?
Yeah, they've been really firing on all cylinders and playing some strong football there. We had concerns about what their pass rush would look like coming into this year because they didn't have much of a proven complement to Montez Sweat up front. A lot of younger guys and guys that they're kind of hoping could take that next step. And so far, they've been able to do it. I mean, Matt Eberflus has been a little more aggressive as a blitzer, not over the top, not going crazy like Brian Flores in Minnesota, but seeing him get a little bit more creative with, some sim pressures to bring a linebacker and drop a defensive end somewhere else, and just making sure that what they're throwing at opposing quarterbacks isn't so easy to diagnose at the line of scrimmage. Especially, I think, the more experienced veteran quarterbacks like Dalton or like Matthew Stafford last week or CJ Stroud in week 2, like, they blitz them a lot. Whereas I think when they don't think the quarterback play is very good, like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, they didn't blitz much at all and said, hey, beat us with your arm. I think against Andy, I'm expecting a little bit more of an aggressive look up there. And then this secondary is very aggressive. They've gotten takeaways every single week. If you put a ball up for grabs, they're not going to drop the interception. They're not going to miss the big play. They're going to make it. And I expect them to get at least one in this one to give the Bears an extra possession. And it's just a matter of how well their offense can take advantage of whatever field position that is, or whatever extra drive that gives them somewhere in the game. They finally took advantage last week. Every week is sort of like we're holding our breath a little bit to see what this offense is going to be. But defensively, like, they're really solid from top to bottom. And a big part of that has been staying healthy. They've got pretty much their entire lineup top to bottom with like one backup defensive lineman has been really the only major injury concern on defense. So, fingers crossed that they can keep holding that up. That's going to be one of the big keys to victory for the Chicago Bears is getting turnovers and being able to help this offense out. And we're going to go through some of the other keys to victory for both of these teams so I can get a sense of what the Panthers have to do in order to get a win and what the Bears have to do in order to get a win as we continue our Crossover Thursday podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our Crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Panthers is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. And this season, you can start the year with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, because right now they're going to get you started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you can place $5 on this Bears-Panthers game, where the spread right now is Bears -3.5 at home. The money line is Panthers +172 straight up, or the Bears -205 straight up. And the over-under is expecting a lower scoring game set at 41.5 points. So whether it's Bears-Panthers or WNBA playoffs, Major League Baseball playoffs, soccer, tennis, the combat sports, college football, you name it, they've got it all at FanDuel, all in their app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So to get your $200 in guaranteed bonus bets, win or lose after your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, thanks for tuning in to our Crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Panthers podcast. I'm Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears alongside Julian Council from Locked On Panthers. And our Crossover Thursday podcast is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use our code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Julian, what do you see as some of the keys here for the Panthers? What do they need to do around Andy Dalton? What do they need to do defensively? How can they get a win over the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, looking at the defense first, Lauren, we brought up earlier in the show that Shaq Thompson out for the rest of the season for Carolina. Josie Jewell not expected to play on Sunday with that groin and hamstring injury. So that means Trevin Wallace, rookie, you're up. Claude Charles, you're also up as the two starters at that interior linebacker spot. The Panthers currently have 111 career snaps among their linebackers. 4 guys, 111 career snaps, not starts, snaps. That is concerning when you're just looking at the overall depth and experience. And we'll see. They drafted Trevin Wallace in the 3rd round out of Kentucky for a reason. Hopefully, for the Panthers' sake, they're going to see that reason on Sunday as he steps into that role that they're expecting he's going to hold for the next 4+ years. And Clyde Charles, been more of someone that they've seen as a special teams guy, really stepped up in the preseason as an interior linebacker with that second team unit. So we'll see what they're able to do, but they really going to need those linebackers to not have a significant drop off from the 2 vets in Thompson and Josie Jewell. The second thing I'm looking at, they got to find a way to put pressure on the rookie Caleb Williams. The Bears have given up 16 sacks. It's tied 3rd most in the NFL. 10.2 sack percentage allowed, which is 28th in the league. The Panthers, though, they're not great at getting after the passer. You look at this outside linebacker group of pass rushers outside of Jadeveon Clowney, you don't know who any of these guys are. I saw someone write earlier this week, it's a who's who of whom. And that's the problem when you don't have someone like DJ Woonem, who was within the division a year ago there in the NFC North playing for Minnesota. He's still on the PUP list, recovering from a partially torn quad, also maybe some other health issues there that's keeping him out right now, as he's going to miss his 5th straight game to start off this season. They got to find some pressure on the quarterback this week, especially against a rookie who loves to do things out of structure, but can be prone to make a couple of mistakes. And we've seen that early on in his rookie career. It's going to happen. I think Williams is going to be a good player down the road, but it's still early on. And I think Ejiro Rivera is a DC that can get after him. So they got to be able to find somebody to get some pressure. And that's just the thing you want to do each and every single week, but only 5 sacks, league worst 12.8 pressure percentage. Not great. And then number 3, like Chuba Hubbard has been outstanding on the ground the last couple of weeks. The Bears defense is phenomenal, especially in the secondary, but I think they can be had a little bit in the run game. The Panthers have been solid up front so far. Back-to-back 100-yard rushing games with Chuba Hubbard. That's really where they want to lead off with their offense, be able to take pressure off Andy Dalton against a strong secondary, run the ball. He's 3rd right now in the NFL in success rate. Chuba Hubbard is at 65.5, right behind Chase Brown of the Bengals and Lamar Jackson of the Ravens. Give him the ball, feed him, and that's a way to have success and win a game this Sunday in Chicago.
I will say that it'll be an interesting matchup there of like trying to get this Panthers defensive line going, both in the pass rushing game, but also keeping your linebackers free on the back end so they don't have as much to wash through in the running game against a Bears offensive line that has been really the Achilles heel of the offense so far, particularly on the interior, where your left guard, Tevin Jenkins, we kind of thought would be your best lineman this year. And not only has he been struggling a lot more than we expected, but he's also injured now, dealing with a rib injury. The Bears seem to have some optimism that he could be able to go this week. They're calling it a day-to-day thing, so they'll kind of see. But even if he does go, he's not going to be at 100%. He's going to be dealing with some pain there, and he wasn't playing phenomenally before he had the injury. And then there's their new center, Coleman Shelton, who they signed from the Rams this offseason, has been pretty disappointing and probably the weakest link up front. And they've been rotating right guards next to them. So that whole interior has been messy. So I think you can trust the Bears tackles a little bit more against somebody like Clowney or Charles Harris on the other side. But I'm looking at somebody like, Ashawn Robinson in the interior, or if Shai Tuttle plays up the nose. Like, I think those are going to be the guys that can make the biggest difference, because that's where the Bears are weaker up front, and also where the Bears are going to want to run the ball up front, right up that middle in the core towards those linebackers. But if the Panthers can win those matchups, I think that's an area where, you can find some advantages.
Yeah, and those are the matchups they won a couple weeks ago when they beat the Raiders on the road, as they got injuries there in the interior defensive line, where Derek Brown, their best defensive player, maybe their best player overall, he's out for the rest of the season with the meniscus tear. Then Shai Tuttle, honestly, has been terrible when he's played here in Carolina, dating back to last season in the first 2 games. They haven't really missed him that much the last 2 weeks. Jaden Peavy has actually stepped up in that role, and he's been a much better player for Carolina than Tuttle has ever been in his tenure here in Charlotte. And Ashawn Robinson is actually all things considered, as bad as they've been up front on the defensive line, has actually been a pretty solid signing for them. He's been an upgrade over the guy, Deshaun Williams, who they had last year. Coincidentally, Deshaun Williams, who did not make the Bills team, is now back on the Panthers practice squad, has been elevated the last 2 weeks, and I expect that will likely be the case again. So we'll see. Like guys like Nick Thurman, LeBron Reagan have to step up, be able to win those battles on the inside. But yeah, it's definitely going to be A'Shaun Robinson and Jaden Peavy are the two guys you're looking at, and if Tuttle's available and healthy with that foot injury, which has caused him the last 2 weeks to miss out on, he'll start, even though I don't know how much that's going to really help Carolina as far as their want to win this game on Sunday. But what about for the Bears as far as the three things they got to try to do in order to win this game on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely ties right back in, right, to the same thing. The interior of this Bears offensive line has to keep making progress. It felt like a step forward last week in the running game. And I give some credit to the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, who came under a lot of fire, but mixed up the run concepts a lot in the ground. They went to some more gap scheme runs, power and counter, and just duo right at the middle down your throat. And I think it let the interior in particular not have to be so athletic, moving side to side, but just like, okay, I'm just going to hit the guy in front of me and try and move him with a little bit more power than finesse here. And I think they were able to lean into that a little bit more. So they need to be able to lean into that again and say, no matter what your combination of the three in the middle is, which at this point could be any combination of the three there, being able to kind of lean forward and get some north-south movement on this offensive line in the running game is going to be so critical, because they want Caleb Williams to just have to be a game manager and to not have to escape the pocket and make miraculous throws outside of structure, right? Like, it's great when he can do that, but you don't want that to be your plan A. You want that to be the plan B or plan C, and not call on that every other passing play because it's the only way you can generate some offense. So they want a boring looking offense where they just run the ball, check it down to the running back, to the tight end, let them make some plays after the catch, and then in theory mix in some deep shots downfield. And that's kind of the other second key here, is that Caleb Williams has taken pretty good care of the football underneath. It's the deep shots where the accuracy is just not yet dialed in. It's getting on the same page as DJ Moore, as Rome Odunze, as Keenan Allen. They'll get guys open, but he'll overthrow it a little bit, or put it a little bit too far in front, or he thinks he's going to bend the route in, but he takes the route vertical, and they're not on the same page there. We're still waiting for the Bears to really unlock that aspect of their offense. They've hit like maybe one or two over the course of the year, but like a little bit more of that. So it's not purely just check down Charlie, but it's the deep shots to open things up vertically, and then you'll create more space underneath for the check downs, and vice versa. Stretch them out horizontally and vertically on offense. And then defensively, the last thing for the Bears here, they just need to keep things in front of them and wait for the Panthers to make a mistake, right? Like, Andy Dalton is a good quarterback, and he's going to be smart with the football, but he's going to give you an opportunity once or twice in the game, and you just have to be able to capitalize that. Don't make it easy on them. Don't give them up the big play. Let them catch it underneath and just make the tackle soundly, and make them go 12 plays to get down the field on you every single drive. Most NFL offenses can't do 12 play drives over and over and over again without a drop, a fumble, an interception, a sack, something along the way, a penalty that derails a drive. So the Bears can kind of just be patient with it and understand that Dalton's going to move the ball a bit between the 20s, but they'll hold firm in the red zone. A turnover or two will go a long way towards giving Caleb Williams and this offense another shot with the ball, another score on the board, and then perhaps another Chicago Bears victory. One last thing I want to ask you about, Julian, before we wrapped up. Panthers ran a punt last week. Could we expect any special teams shenanigans in this game?
I don't know. Depends on what time score is. I think last week it made a lot of sense, considering that they got off to a slow start. They were down 2 scores. Why not try to make something happen in that situation? And they had it until they didn't. It was a great defensive play there by the Bengals. I don't think any trickeration as far as that goes, unless it's absolutely necessary. But I'm very curious to see how this game goes. I know the Bears are still trying to figure out who they are offensively. 5th career start of Caleb Williams, and you've obviously seen Andy Dalton there in Chicago, and we watched him go to Dallas when he had to start when Dak got hurt. We saw him a couple years ago with the Saints when Jameis went down, and this feels like through 2 weeks, this is the best I've seen Andy Dalton look in a long time. So I'm very curious to see if he does indeed put the ball in harm's way, because he's really not done that the first 2 weeks. Last week, it was Trey Hendrickson being able to beat the left tackle, Ike Ekwonu, and be able to knock the ball as Andy Dalton was throwing it. That was really the only kind of issue, like turnover. That's the only turnover he's had so far, but that's the only time he's really put the ball in harm's way. So I'm very curious to see, because I feel like the Panthers, with Dalton, they've been able to move the ball down the field. And the Bears do have an excellent secondary. It'll be interesting to see how many points it's going to take to win this game, especially with a Panthers defense that's struggling and a Bears offense that's still trying to figure out who they are. So I don't think it's going to be a rock fight, but it's going to be an interesting game on Sunday for sure that I think can go either way.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's why the spread is only 3.5 points at FanDuel Sportsbook there. Last thing I'll leave you with, to give you a sense of where this Bears offense has been this season. This week, the Bears official team social media account put out a highlight video of their punter, Torrey Taylor, who's been great this season. But when you're putting out the punter highlight tape, that's not necessarily a sign of a great offense. But
I love that, though, because honestly, that's what Iowa football was doing a couple years ago, as he was literally their best player. So it's good to see that some things stay the same.
Hopefully we get better offense in this game and we don't get a bunch of punts back and forth. But no matter what happens, you can be sure we'll break it down for you on Locked On Panthers with Julian or Locked On Bears with me, Lauren Cox. Make sure you're tuning in and making us your first listens each and every day, no matter which of these two teams you root for. We're all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're not done for this week as well. We'll have Friday shows coming for you, and we'll be back on Monday to break down whatever happens in Bears Panthers. So go check those out. Keep making us your first listen, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.